For the second session, which is Hyde Park 1, I would like to invite as the chairman Dr. Goswami Biraj Jyotiji, co-chairman Dr. Arvind Kumar Maurya, and Governor Dr. Sanjit Banerjee, co-governor Dr. Saurabh Mittalji, and moderator Dr. Bharat Gurnani ji. Also, I would want to inform everyone that Dr. Bharat Gurnani ji is busy in another session, so he will be joining us in some time. But by the time we can, of course, continue with the first paper. Over to you, moderators. Dr. Sanjit ji? Dr. Saurabh ji? Can you hear me?
I request the coordinator to start the session because we are already 1 minute late.
Yes, sir. So the first paper will be presented by Dr. Soumya Ray. Do we have her with Dr. Soumya? Do we have Dr. Nipam Jyoti Das with us?
Yes, I am there.
Sir, would you like to start your paper? Because we don't have Dr. Soumya Ray here available, so we can start with you.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Please make the slide show.
So, do I start?
Please make it in the slideshow.
Yes. Yeah, I have already done it.
Yes. You can start.
Good morning, coordinators. I would like to start off today morning with the paper titled Cataract Surgery in the COVID Era, Our Experience in a Tertiary Eye Care Center. Coronavirus disease, COVID-19, is a new illness that has multi-organ implications caused by a virus called SARS coronavirus 2. Cataract surgery is the most commonly performed surgery in an eye hospital, and ophthalmologists are high-risk category professionals as they have to work in very close proximity with the patients, and both the ophthalmologists as well as patients in high risk of the infection. Now, looking from the infection control point of view in the past and in the present, endophthalmitis has been always a major concern and always dealing with the patient. But now in the present as well as in the future, endophthalmitis as well as COVID-19 has become a new problem, and it is involving the staff, the patient, as well as the attenders. So in our hospital, we considered all people to be potentially infectious. We assumed all body fluids and air around to be potentially infectious, assumed all used surfaces around to be contaminated. We maintained physical distancing at all points in our hospital. When we did surface disinfection and minimal contact of surfaces. We put on government recommended face mask at all times, us as well as the patients and attenders. PPE were worn as per the risk level, and face shield were used, and minimal verbal communication was done so as to minimize aerosol generation. The cataract workup per se remained all the same, except that the SpO2 now was checked, and the physician checkup was done prior to the surgery. A chest X-ray was done if required, if by the physician. And one more thing has to be mentioned, that we did no COVID-19 tests prior to the surgery as per the guidelines issued by the government. Here are few of the photographs of our personnel wearing PPE and doing the procedures. Now, before the procedure, the patient had to sign an informed consent and a consent declaring himself to be COVID-19 free. And on the day of surgery, the patient came to our hospital, he washed his hands, there was temperature screening at the gate, and there was physician consultation. And after the patient was taken in, he was changed over from the street clothes to the hospital linen, and he was admitted to the block room. In the block room, you can see the patient wearing the hospital clothes, and a mask which was worn by the patient at all times, including the time when the surgery was occurring. And all of the surgeries were mostly done under topical anesthesia, except a few for which administration of block was done, for which appropriate PPE was worn. In the operating room, we admitted the patient and we put on the various monitors. Our OTs are of laminar flow, and the patient was draped and the patient was undergoing surgery. In the operating room, we avoided spillage of body fluids and other fluids and blood, and we did the surgery as quickly as possible. In a day, not more than 5 were operated in a single operating room, and gradually the number was increased, and a complete sterile set was used for each case, including the phaco tip and sleeve, the phaco handpiece and tubing were cleaned after each surgery. Surgeon assistant and floor staff and appropriate PPE were there in the operating room. We restricted the number of workers in the operating room. And post-surgery, the cleaning of the patient bed, doorknob, etc. was done with Lysol, and disposal of disposables as per biomedical waste policy was done. After the surgery, the patients changed over to the street clothes, and a checkup was done, post-operative checkup, and counseling and medication instructions were given. An appointment for 1 week post-op follow-up was given. What remained same was the pre and post-operative medication, autoclaving protocols and validations, linen management, as well as biomedical waste policy. Now, looking at the numbers, we see obviously the numbers are lesser than the previous years, but the same
Is the time
advanced cataract
being monitored?
Pardon,
Is
sir?
the time being monitored?
Pardon, sir?
I mean, now your presentation time should be monitored.
Yeah, it is. More of the mature cataracts.
Please conclude as fast as you possible.
More of the mature cataracts were done, and these are the numbers done in our peripheral centers. And nevertheless, the same. We say that the financial burden was not passed on to the patient, as the charges were kept the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we go to the next presenter? And the very important message was given that assume all the surfaces to be infected. That is the take-home message. Assume all the surfaces to be infected, so that we have a mindset to be aware of all the surfaces. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nipam, which type of cataract were more commoner in this COVID era, and how you managed? Were the complication rates high?
All our surgeons, the complications rate, we did surgery as fast as possible. Mainly, we have seen the more number of percentage of cataracts compared to the of course, immature cataracts were there, but the percentage of mature and advanced cataracts were slightly high on the higher side, and appropriately surgeons have done the surgeries, and complication rates are, I mean, whatever as a normal OT would be, it was like that. It was nothing to be alarming, nothing alarming.
Okay, what about the LIG cases? Lens-induced glaucoma?
Lens-induced glaucoma were also taken up, and the surgeries was done. What do you want to know, sir? I mean, the surgeries were taken up and they were done as per because of the emergency nature of the cataract. So it had to be done.
So sorry for the interruption, sir. Since we are running short of time, we'll have to move towards the next speaker. Thank you so much, Dr. Nipam, for the very insightful session. Moving on to the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Alok Agarwal. Dr. Alok Agarwal.
Can you see me?
Yes, sir, we can see you.
Okay.
Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Can you share my screen?
Sure, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yes.
Ready to roll, sir.
1 second. This one? Oh, yes. No.
Click.
Single. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, AIOS, for giving me this opportunity for this wonderful topic, actually. So my topic is actually effect of music in an ophthalmic OT. Now, music is a universal language, and it's a very source of inspiration and which is enjoyed by all ages. So there is always a certain level of anxiousness associated with the undergoing type of the surgery, which includes the ophthalmic surgery. So listening to music is known to make people very calm and relaxed. So hence it is very important to know the extent of awareness and the prevalence of it in an operation theater. So the aim of this, can you just minimize this? The aim of study is, you can just minimize this. Just 1 second. Yes, no, this one. Thank you. So the aim of the study was to evaluate the general perception of the effect of music that can have in an ophthalmic operation theater and its impact on the patients, surgeons, and the OT staffs. So the material and methods, there was a questionnaire-based cross-sectional study which was conducted in our hospital, which was answered by the surgeons, OT staff of our hospital. The surgery was done for a period of approximately 4 months. Total 100 candidates took part in this study. The question was evaluated on the scale of 1 to 5 to assess the response of the study population. Now the evaluation scale was: 1 was strongly disagree, 2nd was mildly disagree, 3rd was can't say, 4th was mildly agree, and the 5th was strongly agree. So the results showed like the total number of the, according to the 100 participants, males was 62 and females were 38, and operating surgeons was 67, OT staff were 33. So average time spent in the OT was less than 5 was 22, between 5 to 10 hours was 43, and more than 10 hours was 35. So according to the age-wise distribution, there were approximately 32 staff and doctors between the age of 20 to 30, 33 between the age of 30 to 40 years, 25 between the age of 40 to 50 years, 7 between the age of 50 to 60 years, and 3 between the age of 60 to 70 years. So the questionnaire was based, actually you can see, and there's a long data in this. Basically the question was asked like, music, does the music reduces the anxiety of the patient? Does music reduces the patient discomfort? Does music produces a sense of familiarity in a strange environment for the patient? Does music makes the patient feel less fatigued? Does music interfere with your communication with the patient? Does music improve your concentration in OT? Does music restricts your automated activity while managing complications? And does music interfere with your communication with the OT staff? And music, does music interfere with the sound of your machine too? So in our study, we found that 79% of the study population felt that music reduces both the anxiety and the discomfort of the patient during an operation. 87% felt that music produces a sense of familiarity in a strange environment, such as operating theater. 77% felt that music made the patient feel less fatigued. The OT personnel, 69% of our study population felt that music improved their concentration in our OT. And 38% felt that music interferes with the communication among the OT staff. 40% also felt that music interferes with the sound of various machines that are used within the ophthalmic OT. So again, if you see, like we asked, we made a data actually. So how many people do prefer music in the OT? So out of 100, I think 66% said yes, 17% said no, and again 17% and maybe and may not be. So there were different types of music which were being asked, like which music do you prefer in the OT? So like classical, ghazal, instrumental, and devotional. So the discussion was like in our study, 66% of the respondents preferred to listen music in the operation theater. This was a similar study done by Alman, which showed 63% listen to the music. So 40% of the respondents in our study showed that thought that music can interfere with the communication among doctors and the OT staff inside the OT, which was higher as compared to the other study, which was done by Hochberg. And 79% of our study population thinks that music reduces both the anxiety as well as the discomfort of the patient. So this is probably why currently music is also used as a method of relaxation in all the chemotherapy and palliative care institutions. So music also enhances the tolerance level of the patients to unpleasant invasive procedures. In turn, the patient becomes more accepting and satisfied. our study revealed that instrumental music was the most preferred music type of within the OT, and 78% felt that they feel music can be played in a low volume. So, so loud music may interfere with the communication with our OT staff members, and therefore playing music inside the operation theater may not be considered as a trivial matter, and the pros and cons should be carefully thought before playing the music. So our study revealed that the benefit overweighted the risk of the playing music in an ophthalmic OT. So these were the references. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alok. Any questions from the attendees?
It's a beautiful,
Any?
yes, it's a beautiful presentation, and I take special pleasure in it because I always prefer music, and I sing myself many times. That's why I'm called a singing surgeon. And it has got a very soothing effect, and it gives a very neurotic improvement to the patient. It's a very good paper.
Thank you, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Alok, for
Thank
the
you so much,
wonderful
ma'am.
presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Moving ahead, I would like to invite Dr. Mehsa Jamil for the next presentation.
Good morning, one and all. I'll share my screen now.
Sure.
I'll be presenting my study on a comparative analysis of morphometric changes in the anterior chamber angle after cataract surgery. So a brief introduction on ASOCT. ASOCT was developed after OCT, which was developed for retinal imaging. And we use a wavelength of 1310 nanometers. It can be used both for quantitative and qualitative assessment of the angle. And if we compare it to the UBM, ASOCT has a disadvantage of not providing visualization of structures posterior to the iris, such as ciliary body, zonules, and peripheral lens. The aim of the study was to study the changes in the angle of the antechamber after phacoemulsification and manual small incision cataract surgery using an SD-OCT. So our objectives were to study the changes in the anatomy after cataract surgery and to justify the role of cataract surgery as an adjunctive treatment for control of IOP. And we also wanted to perform a quantitative assessment of the changes after cataract surgery. And we also had to study the changes at the site of incision and the site opposite to it. So we conducted a quasi-experimental study in the Department of Ophthalmology, AIIMS Rishikesh, and the study was approved by the Institution Ethics Committee. We had enrolled around 60 patients, and they were divided into two groups. Group A had 30 patients who had undergone phacoemulsification, and Group B had 30 patients who had undergone small incision cataract surgery. The division of the patient in the two groups was according to the patient's preference for a foldable or a non-foldable IOL. So in both the groups, patients had undergone preoperative routine ophthalmic evaluation, and all the surgeries were performed by a single surgeon under identical conditions. And Group A underwent phacoemulsification through a 2.75 mm clear corneal incision, and Group B had undergone manual SICS through a 6 mm frown incision, which was placed 1.5 mm from the limbus. In all the patients, the IOL was placed in the bag. So we evaluated the patients preoperatively and post-operatively at 1 week and 6 weeks. The evaluations were done by the same observer under identical lighting conditions and undilated pupils. So the parameters that were evaluated were central antechamber depth, antechamber angle, antechamber opening distance, which was 500 and 750 microns from the scleral spur. We also evaluated trabecular iris space area, which was placed at 500 and 750 microns from the scleral spur. So what we found out was that all the parameters showed an increase from preoperative to postoperative 1 week, as that can be seen in the graph. But from 1 week to 6 weeks, all the parameters in both the groups tend to show a plateau. And in Group A, the parameter that showed maximum increase was TISA 750, which showed an increase of about 45%. And in group B, that is the patients who had undergone manual SICS, the parameter to show maximum increase was TISS 750, which had an increase of 49%. And after evaluating and comparing the results of both the groups, what we found out was that the changes brought about in the angle parameters were similar in both phaco and manual SICS. And both the changes were similar at the site of incision and the site opposite to it. So this is a table of group A. The blue table is of at the site of incision, and the orange table is of opposite to the site of incision. And this shows the changes in the parameters from preoperative to 1 week and 1 week to 6 weeks. This table belongs to the group B, and this side is the at the site of incision, and this is of opposite to the site of incision, showing an increase from preoperative to 1 week and 1 week to 6 weeks. So to conclude that anterior chamber, what we found out from the study was that anterior chamber OCT can provide valuable data regarding the changes in angle of anterior chamber. And the angle parameters, they show an increase. The maximum increase, what they show is from preoperative to first week. And then they tend to stabilize, as that can see from the graph, that the parameters show have a tendency to form a plateau from 1 week to 6 weeks. And the changes are brought about both at the site of incision and the site opposite to it. And in terms of changes in the angle parameter, both the surgeries, phacoemulsification and manual SICS, are almost similar, and the changes are comparable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehsa, for the wonderful presentation. Very, very descriptive presentation. Any questions for Dr. Mehsa? If no questions, we can move on to the next session. For the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Aanchal Jalwa. May I please request Dr. Aanchal Jalwa to please share their screen and unmute their lines.
Can I?
Dr. Aanchal, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Over to you, ma'am. We can see your screen.
Okay. Can I start, ma'am?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Aanchal Jalwa, third year junior resident. My co-authors are Dr. Alka Jha ma'am and Dr. Vireshwar Prasad sir from the upgraded Department of Ophthalmology, DMCH, Lahariya, Bihar. My topic is Impact of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana on incidence of pterygium in females of North Bihar. Introduction. Pterygium is a well-known external ocular condition, and it is fairly common in tropical countries like India because of more cumulative yearly exposure of ultraviolet light, heat, and dust. Secondhand smoke produced by burning of wood and dry dung fuel is also regarded as a causative factor for pterygium development. In North Bihar, most of the rural population uses traditional wood burning stoves for cooking. Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which was launched on 1st May 2016 to distribute the free LPG connections to women of below poverty line families. The aim of my study is to evaluate the impact of decrease in exposure time of second-hand smoke from wood and dry dung fuel on a number of female patients of pterygium of rural areas of North Bihar after commencement of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Materials and methods. This is a non-randomized epidemiological and clinical study which is conducted at Upgraded Department of Ophthalmology, DMCH, Lahariya Sarai, Bihar, which caters the populations of rural areas of North Bihar. In the year 2019, all the patients of pterygium who visited OPD were examined for vision and ocular health assessment. A detailed history regarding exposure time per day of second-hand smoke were inquired. The number of male and female patients were compared with retrospective hospital data of a year before Ujjwala Yojana 2015. Results and discussion. Total number of male and female patients of the pterygium in the year 2019 were 198 male and 150 female patients, whereas in the year 2015, there were 210 male and 182 female patients. On comparing the data of these 2 years, a significant decrease in number of female patients in the year 2019, which was 17.58%, as compared to the female of year 2015. P-value is less than 0.001. Group data of these 2 years reveals that incidence of pterygium in females decreases due to less exposure time on cooking with gas. This is a chart showing number of the female patients, which was high in the year 2015, and in the year 2019, the number of female patients are decreasing. This is a bar graph which shows mainly the number of the female patients, which was high in the year 2015 and decreasing in 2019. This is a chart showing number of female patients, which was maximally they are falling in the age group of 30 to 60 years, and they are high in the year 2015. So between 30 to 60 years, the number of female patients, they are high in year 2015, whereas in 2019, the number will be decreasing. So in the year 30 to 60 years age group, the number is decreasing. So conclusions, after 5 years of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, a significant decline, it is noted in a number of female patients in the year 2019, approximately 17.58% of the pterygium as compared to female in 2015 due to less exposure time of second-hand smoke on cooking with gas. Future studies may provide further insight into this correlation. These are my references. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, Dr. Aanchal, and thank you so much for summing it on time. I should say prior time. Amazing. Any questions for Dr. Aanchal? All right. So moving on to the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Bharti Sharma. May please request Dr. Bharti Sharma to switch on their camera, unmute their lines, and start the screen sharing.
Yes, ma'am, I am here. So I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Over to you.
One second. Yes. So good morning, everybody. So I will be speaking on refractive outcomes of simultaneous phacoemulsification with pterygium surgery with fibrin glue. So the aim of this study was to assess the refractive outcomes after simultaneous pterygium excision and phacoemulsification with foldable intraocular lens implantation with fibrin glue. So as Dr. Aanchal has already given the background, pterygium is a wing-shaped fibrovascular overgrowth arising from the subconjunctival tissue extending across the limbus onto the cornea. As it progresses across the limbus towards the pupillary area, it basically causes astigmatism, which is usually with the root, and it results in decreased vision. It is most common ocular surface disease in the elderly and is usually accompanied with senile cataract. The definite treatment we all know of pterygium is its excision with conjunctival limbal autograft, which is associated with lower recurrence. Now, conjunctival autograft addition with fibrin glue is now the technique of choice in many centers worldwide. The use of fibrin glue reduces the operative time. It results in less post-operative pain and early post-operative rehabilitation of patient as compared to the use of sutures. Pterygium excision can be performed prior to or combined with cataract surgery. During sequential surgery, it is important to wait for stabilization of cornea, which could take any time between 4 to 12 months. Many patients now prefer single-step combined procedure of pterygium excision with cataract surgery, as it provides faster visual recovery, reduced visits to the hospital, and overall cost for the treatment. So 11 patients who came to us in the OPD at Tata Main Hospital, they underwent simultaneous phacoemulsification with foldable intraocular lens with pterygium excision with autograft with fibrin glue under local anesthesia. We gave peribulbar anesthesia to all the patients. The pre and the post-operative evaluation included the subjective refraction, best corrected visual acuity, keratometry we did with the Topcon autorefractometer, A scan with the Oculus machine from Alcon. We did the IOL power calculation and slit lamp examination, dilated fundus for all the patients. We excluded the patients who had astigmatism more than 3.5 diopters, very big fleshy pterygiums where we could not get good Myers for the K reading, recurrent or double-headed pterygiums, any cases of traumatic or complicated cataracts, or any concomitant eye disease. Informed consent was given to obtained from all the patients for the surgery. after explanation of the nature and possible consequence of the study. So the surgery included, all the patients underwent standard phacoemulsification with foldable monofocal aspheric IOL, which was followed by pterygium excision with the conjunctival limbal autograft with fibrin glue. We used Baxter Tissel kit under peribulbar anesthesia for all the cases. So as you see, I have already finished the phaco and
nothing is happening. Can you come?
So
Instead of
we
walking
have.
there?
Yes.
Batana.
Can you please mute your mics, please? Right. Thank you. So we first did standard phacoemulsification through the superior-temporal 2.8 millimeters clear corneal incision, and then we removed the pterygium and we pasted the graft with fibrin glue. You can see all the steps. So all the surgeries were uneventful. Post-operatively, the patients were started on topical steroids, moxifloxacin and lubricants 4 times a day. We asked the patients to patch between topicals until their cornea healed. Then we followed the patients on first day, 5th day, 3 weeks, and last follow-up we have is up to 6 months. We analyzed the results retrospectively. So these are our results. The mean age of our patients was 61.9 plus minus 7 years. We had 50 to 70 years. This was the range. We had more number of males than the females. 8 were males and 3 were females. So at 6 months, we saw that the mean best corrected visual acuity significantly improved from 0.67 logMAR to 0.02 plus minus 0.06 logMAR post-operatively, and this was statistically significant. Our mean post-operative astigmatism significantly reduced from minus 1.85 to around minus 0.61 diopters, and this was also statistically significant. Our mean keratometry readings marginally increased only from 44.03 to 44.36 post-operatively. This was not very much significant. At 6 months, what we saw was that 85%, 0.71% of the eyes were within 0.5 diopters and 14.28% eyes were within 1.1 diopter of the targeted correction. So our target was 0. Mean post-operative myopic spherical error was minus 0.23 plus minus 0.27 diopters. These are the photographs taken from one of the patients. You can see the pre-operative, the first post-operative day, and 6 months post-operative. So to conclude, simultaneous pterygium and cataract surgery was safe and effective, and accuracy was moderately predictable. Small amount of myopic shift did occur post-operatively, possibly resulting from steepening of the cornea after pterygium removal, especially when the size of pterygium was large. Performing these 2 procedures simultaneously can save time and energy and is cost-effective for the patient, particularly in our Indian subcontinent, where the incidences of pterygium and senile cataract are higher than elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bharti, for the very wonderful presentation. It was very informative and very well descriptive. Moving on to the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Poonam Singh. I would request Dr. Poonam Singh to please start sharing their screen, unmute their lines and switch on their camera.
Dr. Diksha?
Ji, sir.
Please allow Dr. Santosh Bhide. He has some other commitment also. So after this presentation, allow him to present his presentation. Okay?
Sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Can I start?
Yes, madam. Please go ahead.
Respected chairpersons, cataract and refractive surgery are 2 major public health related issues, especially as far as ocular criteria are concerned in developing countries like India. A considerable portion of the patients with these problems stay in rural, remote, and unreachable areas where the facilities of the public health services are not effectively available. So ICAMs are the desirable and accepted facilities for visual rehabilitations in these areas, which will attribute to reach the goal of National Program of Control of Blindness by improving the visual rehabilitation in most of the patients. So patient satisfaction depends upon the visual outcome. So the aim of this study is to analyze the outcome of cataract surgery done in CAMS in terms of visual acuity, satisfaction rate, and also the complications. This paper was taken for the cataract surgery was performed in a reach-in type of operation theaters where the patients were selected in rural areas in association with Red Cross Society of India camps. All those patients were seen, their initial visual acuity was checked. Ophthalmologists saw the patients and they decided which are the patients who will undergo cataract surgery. All those patients who required the refractive error correction or any other eye-related issues were separated and they were managed accordingly. All these patients underwent small incision cataract surgery with intraocular lens implantation. The preoperative vision was checked and the post-operative complications and satisfaction level were assessed. Total number of patients over a period of 1 year were 1,053, of which 568 were females and 485 were males. Mature cataract was seen in 69.3% of the patients. The intraoperative complications, according to the Oxford Cataract Treatment and Evaluation Team, was 3.5%. The postoperative complications were mainly transient corneal edema, 4.2% of the patients, hyphema in 1.23% of the patients, hypopyon was seen in 0.48% and residual cortex was seen in 1.58% of the patients. Malposition of IL was seen in 0.4% of the patients. The visual outcome as calculated the visual outcome as per the WHO criteria. So just give me a moment. Just give me a moment.
Sure, ma'am. Please go ahead. You still have 45 seconds, ma'am.
मेरा ये दूसरा वाला था, ये गलत है, दूसरा वाला था, राइट साइड शेप. अरे यार, तो इसको हटाना है, मेरे को दूसरा वाला कर सकते हैं.
You can say it, ma'am, if it's not appearing.
Yeah, actually, I have shared a different this thing. So the visual outcome was good in as per WHO criteria in 89.5% of the patients on the first post-operative day, which improved to about 92.3% of the patients on 6 weeks. It was borderline 8.5% of the patients improved to 3.6%, and it was poor in 1.9% of the patients, stayed to 0.9% even after 6 weeks. Only 49% of the patients came for post-operative visual assessment or assessment after 6 weeks. So to conclude, the cataract camp surgeries play a commendable role in making elderly patients visually rehabilitated, independent, mobile, and socially productive. A high quality of cataract surgery with low complication rates and good visual outcomes can help to clear the cataract backlog. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, Dr. Poonam. Thank you for the presentation. Moving on to the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Santosh Shankar Bhide.
Good morning,
Over to you,
everybody.
sir.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Yeah, thanks a lot. At the outset, I would like to thank organizers for giving me opportunity, and I'm going to share my study retrospective analysis of YAG laser capsulotomy after phacoemulsification. There is no financial interest in this study. We all know that posterior capsular opacification is a common cause of diminution of vision following uneventful cataract surgery. And the incidence is about 2 to 5% in first 3 years post-operatively and 8 to 10% after 5 years. PCO rate varies depending on the type of the lens, design of the lens, and the lens material. We all know that. On review of literature, I have not yet found that whether there is any higher incidence in a particular eye, whether there is a high incidence in right eye or left eye. No such study or no such analysis was found on a review of literature. We all know that the lens capsule is a basement membrane composed of type 4 collagen fibrils and sulfonated glycosaminoglycans. And anterior capsule is produced by lens epithelium and posterior capsule is produced by elongation of lens fiber cells, which is highly elastic, thickest at equator and thin at posterior pole. And development of PCO is a dynamic process. It involves three phenomena: proliferation, migration, and differentiation of lens epithelial cells. Clinically, there are two different components of posterior capsular opacification: regenerative and fibrotic. Residual lens epithelial cells secrete various types of cytokines that control PCO development. So there are two types, regenerative and fibrotic. Regenerative PCO is commonest form of PCO caused by posterior migration of lens epithelial cells. They form a large balloon-like bladder cells, also known as Weddell cells, or also called as Elschnig pearls. And these Elschnig pearls represent failed attempt of an epithelial cell to differentiate into the lens fibers. Here we can see all the Elschnig pearls in the photograph. Fibrotic PCO is a differentiation of a cell into a myofibroblast-like cell, which is highly contractile. It forms a layer extracellular ground substance basement membrane-like material causing whitening and wrinkling of the capsule. In my study, over the last 17 years, there were about 1,752 YAG laser capsulotomies performed by a solo practitioner. Of these, 1,368 cases were operated by a single surgeon, that is myself had done all the cases. All cases were done by using Alcon phacoemulsification machine, no financial interest, and coaxial irrigation aspiration was used in all the cases because I am used to using coaxial irrigation aspiration and I find it very convenient. All cases were performed by surgeons sitting superiorly and incision site was at 11 o'clock position, that is superotemporally in right eye and superonasally in left eye. Of the 1,368 patients, 1,259 patients had undergone bilateral cataract surgeries. 52% were male, 48% were female, so there was no statistical significance. In bilateral surgeries, lenses were same, all the material was same, technology was same, irrigating fluid was same, viscoelastic was same, so there was no other bias. And of these 1,259 cases, 62% cases were in the left eye as opposed to others were in the right eye. So my findings were PCO development is more in the left eye compared to the right eye. Average period of PCO development in left eye was shorter, that is 2.5 years compared to 5 years in right eye, which is also statistically significant. And other findings were same, like hydrophilic acrylic has more than the other and comorbid eyes have more. So what may be the cause for left eye more? We will have to study. Hypothesis is maybe there are pluripotent lens epithelial cells more inferonasally, which are not removed in the left eye. Because of coaxial irrigation and aspiration, I may not be able to reach there. And there are more viable cells in the inferonasal quadrant. I request everybody to analyze their cases and whether there is a real left eye preponderance, we'll have to just find out. Thanks again for the opportunity, and thank you, Maurya sir, for giving me opportunity ahead because I have to move to the other hall also. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Because you are not here.
Pardon me, sir.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
Age group, any age group was more susceptible to PCO?
No, sir. Age group was slightly more in the younger patients as compared to others. Slightly more when it was an immature cataract rather than a hypermature cataract. In fact, I have found that if you do phaco or any surgery in hypermature, you get less incidence of PCO. So, in fact, another finding is that about 20 years or maybe more, when we used to use PMMA lenses, patients used to get PCO, but that was not that visually disturbing in those patients. Somehow they never complained and we never had to do YAG laser or we never had to really do. But when we are doing a high-end hydrophobic acrylic lenses, they are more, patients are more demanding or what, I don't know. They
totally agree with you.
Yeah. Some study has to be done. Maybe we are lacking.
100%. Absolutely.
More study at more centers with high volume numbers should be done. And I don't know. In fact, I had discussed with many of the colleagues from abroad also, and they just laughed at me. They said, is it a real finding? Because maybe probably they are also finding the same thing, but I don't know. Maybe because I'm doing from superior end for the left eye to reach inferonasal part, maybe it is difficult. Or
Yeah,
maybe
slightly
more cells are because of the development part, it closes inferiorly. So maybe there are more pluripotent cells inferonasally in both the eyes.
Okay, Dr. Santosh, excellent presentation. Okay.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, Dr. Santosh. Thank you. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next speaker, I would like to invite Dr. Jyoti Guntia. May I please request Dr. Jyoti Guntia to start sharing their screen, unmute their lines and switch on their camera. Seems like we don't have Dr. Jyoti Guntia online. Moving on to the next speaker, I would like to invite Dr. Manjushri. May I please request Dr. Manjushri to start sharing their screen, unmute their lines and switch on their camera?
Yes, just give me a minute.
Sure, madam.
Yeah, am I visible and
Yes.
is my presentation seen?
Yes, we can see you, ma'am.
Yes, okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The title of my study is Knee Robbery of Sight, Glaucoma Prevalence Study. The primary goal of care of glaucoma patients should be to avoid deterioration of quality of life. The European Glaucoma Society integrates a community perspective, that is to prevent loss of quality of life at an affordable cost. Hence, the knowledge about the prevalence, risk factors, and the burden of glaucomatous blindness is essential to plan health programs. In spite of its public health significance, there has been inadequate data available referring to the prevalence of glaucoma and likely risk factors of glaucoma in India. The aim of the study was to estimate the prevalence of glaucoma among individuals of the age group more than 40 years hailing from Belgavi district of Karnataka, and also to assess the risk factors associated with glaucoma. This was a cross-sectional study, and as part of the study, screening camps were conducted in various rural areas of Belgavi. The camps were open to all the individuals willing to get a comprehensive eye examination, and it was an opportunistic type of glaucoma screening. And totally 1,000 patients were screened during the study. At the community level, in the camps, the demographic data and the history of the patients were noted. Visual acuity was assessed, anterior segment examination was done, and a dilated fundoscopy done for optic disc evaluation, and the intraocular pressure was measured. If any individual was suspected to have glaucoma based on the optic disc evaluation and the intraocular pressure, then they were referred to the tertiary hospital for visual field analysis, gonioscopy, and if required, diurnal recording of intraocular pressure. Of the total 1,000 patients examined, 16 patients were diagnosed with glaucoma with a prevalence rate of 1.6%. And of all the diagnosed cases, the highest prevalence was of primary open-angle glaucoma with 56.25%, followed by normotensive glaucoma, and one case each of pseudoexfoliative glaucoma and primary angle closure glaucoma was detected. A positive association was seen between the prevalence of glaucoma and gender, where males were at 6 times higher risk of glaucoma than females. And no association was noted between factors like age and systemic diseases like hypertension, diabetes, migraine, presence of high myopia, chronic use of steroids, cigarettes, and alcoholism, and family history. On comparing the data of the present study with the previous prevalence studies done on Indian population, we can see that though the prevalence of primary open-angle glaucoma is comparable, there is a huge variation in the prevalence of primary angle closure glaucoma. This can be attributed to the fact that primary angle closure glaucoma, being an emergency, usually seldom presents to screening camps. And also the present study followed an opportunistic type of glaucoma screening, whereas the rest of the studies followed a universal screening protocol. So to conclude, despite effective and advanced medical and surgical therapies being available to reduce the rate of visual loss owing to glaucoma, there is a huge lag in early detection of the disease. Increasing the awareness of comprehensive eye screening beyond 40 years of age can help early detection and treatment, thus preventing burden of blindness. In view of the low prevalence rate, universal screening may not be feasible. Hence, opportunistic screening should be promoted. Thank you.
Dr. Manjushri, I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
Number one, what is your preferred choice of means investigation to look into the progression of glaucoma? Number one. And number two, how many of the POAG converted into PACG in your study?
So in my present study, none of the cases converted to angle closure glaucoma, sir. And all these patients were either medically or surgically operated as required. And sorry, what was the second question, sir?
No, you answered the second question. First was your preferred method of investigation to check the progression of glaucoma.
Sir, I used a regular visual field analysis, sir.
Dr. Manjushri?
Yes, sir.
I would just like to ask you, where from did you get the title of the paper?
So actually, glaucoma is termed the sneak robber of glaucoma of vision because it gradually causes the diminution of vision. So hence,
it is not the sneak robber of vision, a sight.
Okay.
It is the silent thief of vision that is mentioned by John Milton, who has written that Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, Lucidas, and he is considered the second most influential writer after Shakespeare. And he has written because he was affected by glaucoma at the age of 28 years, and he became totally blind at the age of 43 years. So he has written these words, the silent thief of vision.
Okay, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Manjushri, for the wonderful presentation. Moving on to the next session, I would like to invite Dr. Pranami. Do we have Dr. Pranami?
No, I guess.
Moving on to the next speaker, I would like to invite Dr. Meghali Bhattacharjee. Dr. Meghali, may I please request you to unmute your lines and start sharing?
I would thank AIOS for giving me this opportunity to speak on posterior polar cataract surgery made easy for beginners. Next slide, please. Posterior polar cataract is the most feared type of cataract, which if handled appropriately will give fantastic results. Management of PPC begins with a careful slit lamp evaluation and diagnosis. Complication may be anticipated if on slit lamp examination, the anterior vitreous reveals oil-like droplets or particles. High possibility of pre-existing posterior capsular opening. Sharply defined round or oval white opacity with dense white spots at the edge is often associated with thin or absent posterior capsule. As we know that each step in cataract surgery is of paramount significance, and to reduce the rate of complications, each step has to be given attention. Proper construction of incisions are crucial in achieving successful surgical outcomes. During capsular access, overfilling of the anterior chamber with viscoelastic should be avoided. Size of the rhexis should be more or equal to 5 mm. This prevents backflow of fluid during hydrodelineation. Downward movement of the forceps or cystitome should be avoided to prevent blowout of the PC. Hydrodissection is contraindicated, whereas hydrodelineation is mandatory to separate the nucleus and epinucleus. Vigorous decompression of the capsular bag is contraindicated. Nuclear rotation is contraindicated as it may punch out the posterior capsule. In our modified technique, after CCC, trenching is done followed by inside-out hydrodelineation. Low parameters with a slow motion phaco is safest as it helps in maintaining a stable chamber, power less than 60% with a bottle height of 50 to 70, aspiration of 15 to 25 ml, and a vacuum of 30 to 90 millimeters should be safe. This helps in reducing the infusion drive and less fluid around the lens. To reduce the risk of PCR and vitreous loss, care is to be taken to avoid collapse of the anterior chamber, which might cause stenting of the PC and spontaneous rupture. Dispersive viscoelastics through side ports is injected before withdrawal of the phacoprobe. A right angle cannula is introduced into the lens through the trench perpendicular to the lens fiber in the desired plane through one of the trench, and hydrodelineation is performed. This prevents inadvertent subcapsular injection and overcomes the difficulty of introducing the cannula to the significant depth in a dense cataract. No rotation of the nucleus is done. Viscodissection is done to bring the nucleus out of the bag. Soft cataract can be removed by phacoaspiration, while harder ones can be removed by phaco-chop. Care is to be taken to exert minimum stress on the bag. After viscodissection, a flip and chip method could also be used for emulsification. The epinuclear part is aspirated layer by layer by bimanual aspiration and irrigation cannula. The thin layer of cortex adherent to the capsule is left behind. The posterior layer along with the plaque is then viscodissected and aspirated with the irrigation aspiration cannula. Cortical aspiration is done by the tangential movements, rather pulling it towards the center. Removal of the posterior plaque should be done in the last stage of the cortical aspiration. It could be removed with viscodissection and aspiration by the phaco-tip, or a posterior capsule should be performed. Ending laser could be done at a later stage. Avoid polishing of the posterior capsule. Loose cells may be irrigated gently with a 1 cc syringe. In our study, phaco done by a single surgeon, 17s were successful. 1 PCR was managed with 5.5% incidence. To conclude, inside-out hydrodelineation followed by dissection reduces the risk of PCR, making it extremely safe for the beginners. In case of a tear, a proper 2-port anterior vitrectomy is recommended with a high cutting rate and a low vacuum rate. The tear can be converted to a PCC. IOL is implanted in the bag if the tear is small, or in the sulcus. SFL or iris claw lens can be suggested in case of a questionable zonular integrity. Thank you.
Dr. Meghali?
Yes, sir.
How did you modify your chopping technique in cases of harder cataract with PPC?
Sir, preferably a phaco chop. Hold the nucleus, bring it slightly to the center, and we don't crack it till the center. Partial thickness up to the center, sir. And gradually flip it up. The central plaque is left behind, sir.
Okay.
Can you tell us the parameters you use again?
Sir, phaco power should be preferably less than 60% with a bottle height of 50 to 70, aspiration roughly to 15 to 25 ml per minute, and a vacuum of 30 to 90, so depending on the case.
Fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghali, for your participation. Up next, we have Dr. Suchita, but since she is busy, her co-author will be presenting. So I request you to please start your screen sharing and unmute the mic so that we can start with your paper presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Just I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, please share your screen.
Sir.
Is it taking time? We can start with the other presenter.
Sir, yes, sir, there is slight problem with the...
Ekta, can we go on with the next presenter?
Sure, sir. Sir, up next, we have Dr. Namita Prakash. Ma'am, do we have you here?
Yeah.
We can start with your paper presentation and post which Dr. Ravi Kumar can come back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, make it full screen and go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting a paper on the comparative study between direct chop and stop and chop in phacoemulsification surgery of hard cataract. So coming to the introduction, visual impairment has emerged as a potential debility and the contribution of cataract to it is huge. And the cataract surgery has undergone significant evolution and the emergence of phacoemulsification is a major milestone. The pivotal element when you determine the success of a phacoemulsification would be the firmness of the brunescence of the lens, and hard cataract will represent advanced stage of maturity and quite challenging for the surgeon. So various nucleotomy techniques have been described, and this study has been formulated to evaluate the safety and efficacy of two surgical techniques, which are the direct chop and stop and chop in phacoemulsification of grade 3 to 4 nuclear sclerosis. It was a hospital-based prospective randomized control study and was conducted over a period of 1 year. And all the patients were diagnosed with grade 3 to 4 nuclear sclerosis, and wheeling for phacoemulsification with PCOL implantation was included in the study. A sample size of 96 was taken, and the patients were grouped into group A with those undergoing direct chop and group B with those underwent stop and chop technique. The clearance and informed consent taken, and the patients with any corneal disease, glaucoma, pseudoexfoliation, previous history of trauma, surgery were excluded from the study. A comprehensive ophthalmic examination was performed and grading of the nuclear sclerosis as well as the preoperative best-corrected visual acuity were noted. Then the patient underwent the procedure by a single surgeon. And during the surgery, the intraoperative phaco parameters like the mean effective phaco time, cumulative dissipator energy, and the amount of aspiration fluid used, as well as any complications were noted. Postoperative assessment was done in day 1 week, and 4 weeks postoperatively. Coming to the results, most of the patients who underwent the surgery had a vision less than C of 1 meter, and most of the cases were having a nuclear grading of grade 3. And in this study, the mean effective phaco time in the direct chop group was 7.36 plus or minus 3.43 seconds. And in the group B, it was 8.67 plus or minus 5.52. However, there was no statistically significant difference between the two groups. Similar was the case of the cumulative dissipator energy, where the energy was found to be 8.61 plus or minus 2.87% in the group A, that is the direct chop, and it was 8.84 plus or minus 3.89 in the group B, that is the stop and chop group. However, there was no statistical significant difference. And when we assess the patient post-operatively, by 1 week, 68% of the people in the direct chop and 83% in the group B, that is the stop and chop, had a visual acuity ranging from 6/12 to 6/6, and they improved to almost 97.92% of the patient having a visual acuity ranging from 6/6 to 6/12 at the end of 4 weeks. Only one patient was a case of diabetic retinopathy, which was not picked up early, and another patient had persistent corneal edema. Coming to the discussion, in the study by SAO, it was seen that most of the cases with hard cataract had a preoperative vision of less than 660, which was similar in our study. A study by Watchpay as well as ISET showed that the effective phaco time to be higher in the stop and chop group as compared to the direct chop group. So greater effective phaco time means longer duration of ultrasound energy transfer, so more detrimental effect on the corneal endothelium. And study by Watchpay and Park et al. Had shown that the phaco power to be again higher in the stop and chop group, which was similar to our study. However, there was no statistically significant difference which was noted. And none of the patients encountered any serious intraoperative or postoperative complications in these 96 cases. The limitation, however, of the study was the unavailability of a specular microscope and not being able to do a preoperative and postoperative pachymetry. So to conclude with, the finding from this study concluded that no significant difference was seen between the direct chop and stop and chop when you compare the intraoperative and postoperative parameters. So both are found to be equally efficacious. However, there are a number of studies which offers various innovative nuclear management techniques for hard cataract, and each advocate a different technique. So eventually the individual surgeon must choose his or her own approach for phacoemulsification as far as a hard cataract is concerned. These are my references. Thank you.
Dr. Namita, are there any new chopping technique to further reduce the cumulative dissipation of energy while dealing with the harder nuclei? Can you hear me? I think her
I think
screen.
we have lost Dr. Namita's
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah. Okay. We can move on.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Namita. Next, we have Dr. Neil Shah with us, who will be presenting the paper.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Dr. Ravi Kumar, we will have your presentation once we are done with all the papers in the list. So before that, we'll have Dr. Neil Shah.
Ma'am, Dr. Suchita started screen sharing, so I could not able to upload my screen, my presentation.
Yes, doctor. Actually, no problem. No problem.
Now you're good. Dr. Neil.
Yes, sir.
Your internet
So
is
actually,
working a
someone
bit
is
slow.
present.
Now you can share.
Yes, sir.
AV guys, can you help Dr. Neil?
Dr.
Yes,
Arvind,
sir,
I
yes,
think
I'm
Dr. Neil
sharing
is
it.
facing connectivity
Yes, sir.
issues. Low internet.
Ma'am,
Dr.
actually, I have
Neil, now
shared
you
my
can
screen.
share. Now
I have
you
shared
can
my
share.
screen.
It's not
Yes, sir. I
visible
have
here.
already shared my screen. Is it visible?
It's not visible here.
I can see him, but his internet is actually giving him a bit of a trouble, I
Dr.
think.
Neil, can you switch off your video so that you can have a
Okay,
better
yes, sir.
bandwidth?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
Please
sure.
switch off your video. Yeah.
Yes.
Share your screen.
Share screen. Go to the share screen.
Okay. Yes, sir. I have shared already. Sir, is this visible?
Okay, remove it and then share it again.
You can unshare and start the sharing again. That will solve the issue.
Okay, okay. Is this visible? Oh.
No, it is not.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We can see it now.
Yes, it
Okay.
has come.
Okay. Okay.
It has come.
Okay. Good morning, presenting faculties and my dear colleagues. Today I'm going to present case on prevalence and pattern of ocular diseases in children 5 to 15 years. And so as we already know that childhood blindness is a severity today, and it contributes to the commonest cause of blind person per year. And prevalence of childhood blindness is 1.4 million, and 90% of them are living in developing countries. India has a lot of burden, 2 lakhs blind children. And for this reason, WHO has already put childhood blindness prevention as a topmost priority in Vision 2020 program. And vision impairment has a huge impact over growing child communication, employment, health, and quality. By conducting vision screening program at regular interval in school-going children, we can help in early diagnosis, treatment, and can minimize long-term visual disability. So with this aim, we have under these 4 objectives. First, to study the prevalence of ocular diseases, and then second, to evaluate the pattern which we see, and third, we compare of this in different group and gender-wise distribution. Also, we have so in Santosh Medical Hospital, our HOD guidance. So 5 to 15 years of children were taken in this study from January to 2019 to July 2020. It was a cross-sectional study. All children between age group of 5 to 15 years were included, and below 5 years, above 15 years were excluded. Previously diagnosed, treated children were not taken in study, and child not residing in Delhi NCR region were excluded from study. Taking all the data, we have tabulated in Windows Excel sheet and using MS Office and analyzed that by statistical analysis, SPSS statistics version 25. So in that, so whenever child came to our OPD, we have taken brief history, demographic details, as it's a key part of our study, because it's childhood morbidity and the patterns is different in different region. So all presenting complaints, relevant past history, family history, personal history, we have followed by a systemic examination. Then ocular examination was conducted. In that, visual acuity measurement was done using Snell's chart for distant acuity and near acuity also. Detection, we have used work for test was done by pseudochromatic. So, detection by the standard and anterior and posterior segment examination by slit lamp biomicroscope, fundus examination with direct and indirect ophthalmoscope. Retinoscopy and subjective refraction was also taken. For that, visual acuity in the child, as a visual acuity chart, followed by if the child has visual acuity less than 6/9, then wait retinoscopy 2% eye drop, especially in the child having hypermetropia and esotropia. And after 3 to 4 days, we have done post-optic test. These are some pics, right? So after getting all that data and the result which we get in that, so the prevalence of ocular morbidity was 29.5% in our study. The gender-wise distribution of overall children was male population was 50.5% and female was 14%. And the gender-wise according distribution of normal and children with ocular morbidity suggests there is more morbidity towards the male side, contributing 54.24%. Now the next table shows the pattern of various ocular morbidities. In that, refractive error contributes the foremost with 60, followed by ocular trauma, which count for 6%, followed by congenital ocular anomalies, 2.5%, VKC, 2%, squint, amblyopia, blepharitis, and vitamin D deficiency all contributes to respectively 1.5%, and rest 1% and 0.5%. Age-wise distribution suggesting now the important thing is that school, so there is high significant statistic relationship between school performance and the ocular morbidity, where school performance was declined with the child having ocular diseases. So I have quickly suggest that our prevalence chances. So all this. So finally, to conclude this study, the prevalence was childhood ocular morbidity was highest in 36.5% in 9 to 12 age group, lowest in 28% 5 to 8 years of the age group. Refractive error was found in 8%, where myopia was the most common, followed by hypermetropia and astigmatism. Trauma was the second most common ocular morbidity, with foreign body was more common. VKC was 22%, squint amblyopia 1.5% found, vitamin D deficiency 1.5% was found. And so the limitation we are got study is not reproducible in rural community as it was under this study. And the 5 points we can, so 6 points we can conclude from this study. Timely diagnosis and treatment will progression of the condition.
Conclude, we've exceeded the time.
Okay, yes, ma'am. It's going to community-based program, which we should aim for, and provision of curative child eye care services. Community-based rehabilitation program, we should go for epidemiological research needed for realistic need.
Dr. Neil, bibliography we can read.
Okay.
And
yes, sir.
You had a wonderful presentation, but your voice was cracking all the time. Anyway, the detail part was very good. We could get
okay,
what
sir.
we wanted to.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Neil.
you.
Up next, we have Dr.
Thank you, ma'am.
Agrawal, and I will request her to please start the screen sharing so we can see her presentation. Timer will also start as soon as ma'am starts the screen sharing. Dr. Pankhuri, can you hear me?
Hello, ma'am. Can you see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I start, ma'am?
Yes, please.
Hello, good morning, all. Topic of my paper presentation is intraoperative and postoperative complications of cataract surgery in pseudoexfoliation syndrome. Pseudoexfoliation is a gray-white fibrillary material which gets deposited in anterior segment of eye, including anterior capsule, zonules, ciliary body, iris, and trabeculum. This accumulation increases risk of intraoperative and postoperative complications, among which secondary open-angle glaucoma is a common entity. Therefore, our aim of the study is to analyze and perform complete preoperative assessment so as to reduce risk of the same and to improve visual acuity. In the following figure, we can see deposition of white fibrillary material on pupillary margin. Along with that, there are foci of loss of pupillary ruff. Coming to materials and methodology, this is a prospective cross-sectional study done in MS Ramaiah Medical Hospital from January 2019 to January 2020, and it included 50 cataract cases. All these cases underwent SICS with IOL implantation. Details of patient's age, best corrected visual acuity, IOP, and dilated fundus findings were noted. Before going for surgery, in our study, following assessment was done. Zonular instability was quantified under slit lamp in terms of clock hours. Pupil size after dilation was noted. Anterior chamber depth, whether shallow or asymmetrical, suggesting lens displacement was seen. Glaucomatous status with IOP measurement, optic disc assessment, and gonioscopy was done in order to see the presence of pigments in the angle. In the first image, we can see pseudoexfoliative material on the anterior lens at the central disc and periphery with the intermediate clear zone. In the second image, we can see subluxation of lens from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock due to weak zone. Coming to results, in this study, mean age was 64.76 plus minus 5 years. And among 50 cases, 40 cases, that is 80%, had pupil dilation in the range of 7 minutes. That is, wherein majority of cases, IOP was in the range of 22 to 27 millimeters. Intraoperatively, capsular vent with vitreous loss was seen in 4% cases, where after thorough vitrectomy, PCIOL or iris claw were placed based on the zonular status. Zonular dialysis was seen in 2% cases, and poor pupillary dilatation was noted in 2% cases, where we used pupil expanders like iris hooks. In few cases, mechanical stretching of pupil or sphincterotomy was also done. Posterior capsular rent was noted in 4% cases, and for larger zonular dehiscence, iris claw lens was used. Postoperatively, among 50 cases, we had 43 patients, that is 86% patients, with good visual acuity in the range of 6/6 to 6/36. One patient had vision that is 6/60 to counting fingers 3 meters, and 12 patients ended up with poor vision of less than counting fingers 3 meters. Corneal edema and microcystic edema was noted in 18% and 6% respectively, and hypema was seen in 2% of cases. Therefore, intraoperatively, we anticipated occurrence of small pupil, zonular weakness with vitreous loss, and shallow anterior chamber, and because of which we could manage to reduce postoperative complications of acute rise in IOP, hyphema, anterior capsular contraction, and fibrosis, which is called as capsular phimosis, and corneal edema, along with that enhanced anterior chamber reaction. Hence, with our study, we can conclude that with thorough preoperative assessment, with the use of pupillary expansion device, good viscodispersive device to coat endothelium, capsular tension rings, we can combat this complex surgery with minimal intraoperative and postoperative complications, therefore giving fairly good postoperative visual outcome. Thank you all.
Dr. Pankhuri,
Yes, sir.
This 2% zonular dialysis, was it intraoperative or preoperative?
So that was preoperative, sir. Most of the cases,
what was the grade of the dialysis?
Yes, sir. So for few cases, the clock hours were 6 to 8 clock hours. So we went for iris claw. And one case was there with 4 to 6 clock hours. So we used CTR in that patient, sir.
Only CTR or modified CTR?
So Sioni ring, CTR with the scleral suturing, That one we use.
That is the modified CTI. Okay,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So in few cases, you have implanted iris claw lenses.
Yes, sir.
So that cat's eye was found. So how we can prevent that? How can we have a round and regular pupil after retropupillary iris claw fixation?
So while putting the iris claw, we need to make sure that we are clipping the iris claw clips at the mid-pupillary region, not at the anterior or at the periphery. It has to be at the mid-pupillary region in order to have a circular pupil later, post-operatively. And also, so while putting iris claw, it's better to put pilocarpine and have a small pupil while putting iris claw instead of a dilated pupil.
Pilocarpine, because the size of the iris claw lens is 7.5 minimum size. So how will you deal with that? If with such a small myotic pupil, it will be very difficult.
So we'll take one side of the iris claw, put it behind the iris, clip it with this iris hook and or repositor.
Mid-dilated pupil is always better for iris claw fixation. Later on, you can put pilocarpine.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pankhuri, for your contribution. Up next, we have Dr. Santosh Shankar Dule, who will be sharing screen. Hello. I'm sorry, Dr. Dr. Santosh is already done with this free paper. I'll invite Dr. Ravi Kumar from Dr. Suchita's screen to share the screen and start the free paper. And we'll be concluding this session after that. Thank
Yes,
you.
we are already behind the screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Ravi Kumar? Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Just I'm trying.
Okay, okay, sir.
Now my slides are visible.
Yes, we can see you. You can start. Timers also started.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Ravi Kumar, JR AIMS Bhubaneswar. Today I'm going to talk on effect of aquaemulsification in myopia on OCT measurements, a prospective study.
Sir, unshare and share it again. That will solve the issue.
Now can you share once again?
There is some issue with the slides here.
Dr. Ravi, we can see the first slide.
Yes, sir. Only first slide is being shown. I'm not able to move to the next slide.
Sir, if possible, you can just start talking about whatever is the content of your presentation.
Okay, ma'am. Just.
Sir, you are using the different things. So
trying to do
your image with your presentation. So remove your image with your presentation. Just close it. This image.
Dr. Ravi, switched off your video.
Okay, sir. Stop video.
Now you can start.
Sir, it's still showing the first slide.
Sir, I think you have shared only one tab in the screen. You need to share your complete window when you want to, go through the slides for the screen sharing. That should solve the issue.
Ekta, do we have any other presenters also?
No, sir. We are done. This is the last presentation for this session.
Can I read it out without showing the slides?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience.
I would like to request you kindly to go to your chief observation and the conclusion.
Sir.
Dr. Ravi, please read it out.
My topic is effect of phacoemulsification in myopia on OCT measurements, a prospective study. I have no any financial interest. So phacoemulsification is a gold standard technique in cataract surgery. Fluidics and ultrasonic energy may produce mechanical effects that cause an inflammatory reaction, hypoxia, and compression on the tissue of the eyeball, which leads to the transient rise in IOP in the early postoperative period. The peak incidence of cystoid macular edema varies between the 4 to 12 weeks after phacoemulsification surgery. And there are conflicting data which exist regarding the influence of myopia on peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness after phacoemulsification. So the aim of the study was to analyze the changes of macular thickness and peripapillary retinal nerve fiber layer thickness measured by SD-OCT in myopia and age-related cataract patients after uneventful cataract surgery. So it's a prospective study done at AIIMS Bhubaneswar. The 30 eyes of 30 patients with myopia were taken into cases, and 30 eyes of age-related cataract were taken as control, who underwent phacoemulsification from January 2019 till December 2019. The exclusion criteria were age below 18 years with ocular pathology like uveitis, corneal opacity, trauma, glaucoma, posterior segment pathologies, and systemic pathologies like diabetes, thyroid disease, and vasculitis were excluded. And patients on immunosuppressive agents were also excluded. Macular parameters, RNFL thickness was measured by SD-OCT. Visual acuity and IOP was measured in all cases preoperatively on the POD 1 day and 1 month. And the data were analyzed with student t-test, and significance was set at p-value of less than 0.05. So coming to the results, on comparing the myopia and the age-related cataract group, the variables which we checked are the age, lens hardness, K1, K2, IOP, and exit length and phaco time with CDE. CDE is the cumulative dissipated energy. So on comparing all these variables into two groups, we found that the age is the only age, and exit length obviously was significantly different among these two groups, in which the senile group were having higher age group. 61.76 was the mean with the standard deviation of 8.78. Then the macular thickness values post phacoemulsification was also compared between these two groups, and then we found that only nasal outer macular ring thickness and the temporal outer macular ring thickness was statistically significant, and the myopia group were having thickened nasal and temporal outer macular ring macular area. Then comparing the low myopia and the high myopia, then we found that there is no
Please conclude, sir.
Please go for the conclusion and your chief observation.
So the conclusion was like in patients with high and moderate myopia, macular parameters and RNFL measured by SD-OCT didn't change significantly 1 month following phacoemulsification after cataract surgery.
So Dr. Ravi, any effect on CMT, central macular thickness?
Sir, no, sir.
Stop.
On POD 1 month, there was no any changes on CMT in my study, sir.
No, not after 1 month, just after one or 2 days.
No, sir, there was no any significant, sir, the mean CMT in myopia group was 248.76 and in senile group was 246.56 with p-value of 0.9.
I would like to request the coordinator to conclude the session because others are waiting for the hall.
Can I say something, sir, with the permission?
Yes, please.
Sir, I have the presentation at Helmholtz Hall. I am waiting since 9:30 to 10:55. I have presentation of FT106, but by my turn did not came up.
I would like to request the coordinator to reply to this.
Dr. Soumya Ray, this is the hall coordinator for Helmholtz. I can see that your presentation was the first one that was supposed to start at 9:30.
Yes, you were called. You were called.
Yes, sir, we called for you actually. I think you were unavailable over here. Moderators, may I request for your permission? If you permit, I can take this presentation right now.
Actually,
Yeah.
my internet connection was unstable, so that there is
So,
delay in
Yeah,
joining.
okay, Dr. Soumya, please go ahead and finish it
Go
as
ahead,
soon as possible.
Go ahead with your salient slides.
So we are going to start the next session. Thank you so much.
Can I present now?
Yes,
Aha,
yes.
you
So
got it.
start the screen sharing and we will go to the main slides.
Okay,
You
okay.
go for your salient slides.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yeah, please start. Please hurry up, please.
Okay. Good morning, the respected delegates. Today, my topic of presentation is ocular tuberculosis, its proportion and socio-demographic profile among all types of tuberculosis. As we know that ocular tuberculosis has got diverse presentation, and we need for high index of suspicion to diagnose it. This study was taken with the aim to detect the prevalence of ocular tuberculosis patients among all tuberculosis patients along with their socio-demographic criteria. Recently, the classification of ocular tuberculosis has been laid down by the ICMR and Central TB Division. The signs of ocular tuberculosis has been regarded as presumptive ocular TB, and if they are associated with some extraocular manifestations of other form of tuberculosis, and there has to be one immunological evidence, then we stamp it to be a clinically diagnosed ocular tuberculosis. With this mind, we have examined in the last 1 year 170 newly diagnosed tuberculosis patients for the presence and signs of ocular tuberculosis. And finally, the magnitude of clinically diagnosed ocular tuberculosis was worked out, and SPSS 20 software were used for the data analysis. These are the some results of the socio-demographic profile, and we see there has been most of the patients were male and they are unskilled worker, and most of them were below 10 standard of education. Out of 170 cases, we have 12 cases of clinically diagnosed ocular tuberculosis, and among 12, 10 has been associated with extrapulmonary tuberculosis and 2 has been associated with pulmonary tuberculosis. These are the several clinical photographs of our cases. And we know that from our study, there is a high prevalence of ocular tuberculosis, that is 7.1%, which is more than any other study from India. It is mostly due to our active screening of all the tuberculosis patients. And we know that uveal involvement in tuberculosis is the most important sign of ocular tuberculosis, and the choroiditis has been associated with immune-mediated hypersensitivity reaction. And the choroidal tuberculoma is itself an active tubercular infection. The choroidal tuberculoma has been associated with, as I has 34.6% with other forms of tuberculosis, mostly the intracranial granulomas or tubercular meningitis, as we have the case number 4, having bilateral choroidal tuberculoma with associated miliary tuberculosis that signifies the early dissemination of disease. The tubercular retinal vasculitis has been regarded as delayed type of hypersensitivity reaction, and we have the 11 number case has got anterior and intermediate uveitis that is associated with tubercular hypersensitivity reaction. But contrary to the previous belief, the Ehrlich disease recently diagnosed to be an infectious one because Mycobacterium tubercular DNA has been detected by the PCR from the vitreous fluids of the Ehrlich disease. There has been several recommendations of several societies to diagnose the ocular tuberculosis early so that we can have the pre-treatment visual assessments of tuberculosis patients and dilated fundus examination so that we can pick up them and treat them early. The strength of our study is that the study is unique in nature, that we perform the active screening of all the tuberculosis patients. And the limitations are being in tubercular endemic country, we have 170 cases. And I conclude my presentation that though tuberculosis is rare, but it can be vision threatening, and there's urgent research is needed for the large sample size or community-based study to study the ocular tuberculosis. These are my references and acknowledgement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soumya. Sir, do you have any questions for him?
No. Please hand over to next session coordinators.
Okay, sir. With this, we come to an end to this session.